Let me introduce, if I can, Jared Byas from Common Good Advisors, who specializes in everything that we're going to be talking about today. I was introduced to Jared through a good friend of mine, also an ASA member, running a very large family business out of New Jersey. And Jared had worked with them on their whole transition with the family. We had father, uncle, cousins. I mean, we had everything in there, right, Jared? So did a great job, and I thought, and again, I'm very grateful for you being here, Jared, and for to present here and get us started here. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you. Are you good to present? You can get the slides up.
Yep. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Richard. And it's nice to meet everybody. I'm not going to present for too long because this is a great, I don't want to miss the opportunity to hear from everybody and have you guys learn from each other. At the end of the day, you're the experts. That can be a really good thing or maybe a really challenging thing in family business if you guys are working with families. So I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes and then I'm going to turn it over. For whatever reason, I can only see the slides whenever I start presenting. So Richard's been generous. And if you guys have a question or anything, I'm going to rely on him to kind of interrupt me and then I'll pop back over. But let me share my screen here and then we'll run through it. So I'll be talking kind of quickly, but then I told Richard too to share these slides afterward. And again, we'll follow up with conversation. So that's my hope here. Let's see. Okay. Good. Can everybody see that? Okay.
Yep, we're good, Jared. Yeah.
Good. Okay. So I want to start just briefly with me. You mentioned, Richard mentioned Common Good Advisors. So I've been doing this for over 10 years now. I've worked with about 200, 250 families. This is my team. We're based out of Bucks County, Pennsylvania, just north of Philadelphia. And this is kind of my passion. This is what I do every day. I wake up, sleep, eat, and drink family business A to Z. So let's jump right in. What's so complex about family business? I mean, what's not complex about family business? But in terms of conflict and some of the stuff we want to talk about today, it's just a lot of lack of clarity. So there's unclear boundaries, unclear roles, who does what, unclear authority, and unclear communication on key topics. And those key topics are often money, authority, expectations, conflict itself, and transition. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of those. But the first thing I want to name is that if this is hard and you're in conflict in a family business, you're not broken. It's really normal because there are some naturally occurring conflicts that happen when you work with family. And so some of the families we work with will say, like, we should be able to do this. We love each other. We know each other so well. And so they can feel like something's wrong with them or wrong with their family, but it's very natural. It's naturally occurring conflict. And some of that is related to these overlap of roles and boundaries and authority. Really, you're wearing multiple hats. And so we try to break these hats down into a couple of different segments. So we think about the family hat, and there's different values and different expectations of what it means to be a family member. Then what the values and the expectations are when it comes to your day-to-day job. We call that management, but it's really the role that you're playing in an operational or day-to-day capacity in the company. And then there's the owner role. And we're going to talk in a minute about the difference between those two. But the owner hat is a different hat than the day-to-day hat or role that also has a different perspective and different values. And then the board function, and some smaller family companies don't really have much of a board function, but the other three are certainly in play. And sometimes this can be, you don't notice these things when, say, there's an owner operator or founder or first generation. There's one person in, because they tend to be the head of all of these different roles. They're wearing the hats of all of these. So they're kind of the head of the family, the head of the operating company. They don't really separate ownership and management. So there isn't a lot of conflict when there's only one. But when you get multiple people in these multiple roles wearing multiple hats, you start to have natural conflict. So a go-to example I think of is in the family, you have certain values, and one of those values may be saying like equality. Things are equal. So I know with my kids growing up, I think most parents, Christmas morning comes around and you usually want to make sure that every kid has the same amount of presents, or at least the same value. I know my mom would like tally up me and my sister And even if they weren't the same number of presents, they had to be equal in value in terms of who got what, to the point that my mom would like run out to the store, get me something for my stocking if I was like $5 under my sister. So equality tends to be a high family value. And what happens whenever family, those values get put into a business, where we don't necessarily value equality, right? So not everybody gets paid the same in a business. That doesn't make sense. You'd go bankrupt if everyone had to get paid the same, because that was the value. And you get paid fair market value, or what the role is relative to the other roles in the company. And so you have family and then you have business. When you put those together, you get that black, the messy middle, I call it, that murkiness in the middle of like, well, which value do we have? And this is why when it comes to like getting paid, when we talk about money, some family members are going to say like, but they're all my kids. Why wouldn't I pay them equally? And some are going to say, well, but they play different roles in the company. Why wouldn't we pay them according to the role that they play? So that's just a natural conflict. That isn't necessarily one's right and one's wrong. It's that you're overlapping these two value systems. So it's naturally occurring to have these conflicts. And that black part is really why I have a job. It's because it's complicated and it's messy and it's not going away, right? So the best we can do is build the muscle to try to work through conflict. So that's kind of what I like to say is families like to try to avoid conflict, and they think that's going to be the thing that gets them through, but it is inevitable, as you probably already know. So it's really just about going to the gym and building the muscles. So what are the tools you need? And I think of the tools in two ways: structure and relationship and communication. So today we're going to talk a lot, primarily just about communication, just so that we have more time to talk. So if we want to talk about how to get clear, we want to clear up some of that lack of clarity that can create conflict. We want to communicate. Most people, when they come to us, say that's our number one problem. Our challenge is we don't know how to communicate. We don't know how to talk. And so we're gonna dive into a couple of things that you can do to improve that. The number one thing, you have to get together and you have to talk. So the same people who tell me that communication is the biggest problem in their family business, almost immediately after that tell me how much they hate meetings. And I'm like, well, it's going to be really hard to communicate if you hate meetings, because that's how we're going to communicate, is we have to get together and we have to talk. So the first thing is committing to a meeting routine. You have to commit to getting together. And it seems so simple. And people will do anything they can to avoid the harsh reality that to communicate well as a family business, you got to get in the room together and you got to talk. So commit to that and stick to it, because you will use any excuse to get out of that meeting. There's always, I call it the barking dog or the crying baby, which is the business. There's always something that needs to be done. There's always a problem that needs to be solved. So if you're looking for an excuse, you will find it. So you have to commit to meet and talk. Get into a meeting routine, whether that's once a month, once a quarter, once a week, whatever is realistic and reasonable, right? Don't bite off more than you can chew, but commit to that meeting routine. Second, create meeting guidelines or expectations. So I have a list called meeting expectations that sets down some rules of engagement, so that when we talk, we're going to lower the chances that we're going to get into a fight, right? So those can be very generic things, like we don't interrupt each other. Like we let each other finish when we talk. And some families, right? I'm in Philadelphia area, so some Italian families, not great at that one. They like to talk over each other, and some cultures, they do better with that than others. But we want to create these guidelines. And some aren't generic, they're specific to a family. So I had a family once where they had a specific kind of sarcasm. So one of the spouses in a meeting said, hey, if we're going to create these guidelines, can we add this, I'll call them the Smith family sarcasm. I didn't know what that meant, but as soon as she said it, everybody around the room was like, oh, yeah, let's add that. None of that when we're talking to this stuff, because the stakes are too high. We bring that in, it really triggers people, sets them off. And then the last thing is, when we meet and talk, we have to write down the actions that we were taking, like who's responsible for what. And really importantly, write down the decisions that are made, because so much conflict happens whenever we don't know whether we're just talking about it or we're saying, no, we're definitely going to do this. So many things happen. There's a fight later when someone implements something And the other person's like, well, I didn't know we decided on that. I thought we were just talking about that. Like, that's way outside the bounds for you to go ahead and implement it. So that lack of clarity can be resolved by just writing things down. So you have to meet and talk. 2, okay, what do you talk about? Kind of make sure that you're not talking about day-to-day stuff. There's plenty of time for that. You're probably talking about that all the time. So when you think about communication, oftentimes families say, well, yeah, we communicate all the time, but they talk about operational things. They don't talk about the things that are going to create the conflict. And those are money, who gets paid what and why and when, authority, who gets to make the decisions and why do you get to make it versus me, and how do we shift authority over time if we're in a transition, expectations. So much conflict is because there are unspoken expectations. Just met with a family this week where there was a fight between a father and son, and it turns out it's because the dad has these expectations for the son to step up in leadership and grow, but there's not a career ladder. There's no understanding of what a manager really is expected to do. It's just sort of like, well, you're supposed to know this. Like, why don't you know this? And so there's this all kinds of unspoken expectations. Talk about conflict itself. How do we do conflict? Are we a family that stuffs and then over time it builds and we erupt? Or do we wear our heart on our sleeve and that hurts people's feelings even more? How do we do conflict and how do we do it better? And then the last thing is just transition. You have to talk about the transition, which we often put off and put off and put off. So that's kind of what to talk about. So you have to meet, you have to talk about things. And then there's a list of kind of how to talk about things. And I'm going to run through these real quick. But one is you have to build trust with each other. So being able to address past issues. Unfortunately, when you're in a family business, there's a lot of baggage. There's a lot of things that have happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I mean, the amount of things that come up in meetings from when kids were 10 or 12 or 13 that then have compounded over time. You got to address those things so that we can trust motives. And that's the goal, is we really want to be able to trust that you really want me to win. I want you to win. We want this business to be successful. We're not going to put our own needs above the group and above the business. And if we can't trust that, we're going to have a hard time with the conflict that comes. 2, include everyone. A lot of times parents like to play puppet master, and they like to go to this person to hear what they say so they can kind of control the narrative. And then they go to this person. And it doesn't feel good when you're 35-year-old, 40-year-old and are treated like basically a child, where I don't get included in the larger conversation. I only get bits and pieces. And there's this larger plan at play that I don't know about. So everyone gets a voice. Not everyone gets a vote. That depends on your role. But including everyone helps with communication. Next is just giving and receiving honesty. This is the number one thing. If the first thing that I want you to take away from this is you have to get in a room and talk. The second is you have to be honest with each other. Most families that I work with, I tell them straight up front, you have to be honest. Almost none of them are honest because they were taught if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And that doesn't work as an adult who has to work with people every day, because then things build up over time and it makes it worse. So most people, they're not honest because they don't want to hurt each other's feelings. And the great irony of what I do is that impulse not to want to hurt people's feelings is what hurts more people's feelings than anything, because it builds and then it unleashes, and then you say things more meanly and more strongly than you meant them. And then you're confused on why you're even upset, because we didn't address the little things along the way. So we need to be able to be direct with kindness and without judgment. And secondly, if somebody's being honest with you, you have to be able to receive that feedback without defensiveness, which is really hard in a family business when we're all trying to gain each other's respect and approval. So then it hurts whenever someone's like, you're not doing a good job. And so we can get defensive. So that's a skill to build. How do we give and receive honesty? Trust me, it's so important. People do not believe me. And then 2 years later, we're in it worse than before. Next, share expectations. Turn those unspoken expectations into spoken expectations. I often say, ask for what you want, but don't feel entitled to get it, right? So there's no harm in asking for something, saying out loud, this is my expectation, this is what I think should happen or would want to happen, as long as it's not a sense of entitlement comes along with it. You may or may not get that because there's a lot of needs and a lot of wants in the room. So that's kind of how to talk. And the last thing is learn to apologize. If you're going to be in a family business, this is a skill you have to learn. If you don't want to hurt people's feelings, learn to apologize well, learn to apologize often. The goal is progress, not perfection. Good. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is just not just kind of best practices in general, but transition can also create some conflict. So just a couple of notes on that. Like I said earlier, separate ownership and management. A lot of conflict happens because we're not clear on the distinction between that. So we're trying to kind of put a square peg in a round hole when we're trying to get everyone to be the owner operator that mom or dad was, depending on the generation and the setup. And it's like, we have to have a different imagination for what the structure is going to look like. And part of that is separating that ownership and management. It can reduce the anxiety quite a bit. And there's a lot more I could say about that. It's a really important principle. But secondly, leading generation, you have to learn to let go. It's not easy. It's not handing the keys to the next generation one day and saying, all right, I'm out of here. It's an active process. I call it sort of that last great act of leadership. And the rising gen has to learn to step up. So that's the third thing. And that's the great dance. As someone's letting go and someone's stepping up, how do we not step on each other's toes, right? Next, to avoid conflict, write plans down. So the rising generation, they don't, or I should say the leading generation, the older folks, they don't want to write plans down because they're like, what if I change my mind? I don't want there to be an expectation that I'm going to do this thing. I don't have all the data. I don't have the information. How am I going to? And so they don't write anything down. And we end up in this perpetual, vague, I call it the rolling 5-year plan. There's kind of a plan, but not really. But the rising gen, they want it set in stone. So it's something they can count on because there's always so much ambiguity. And so I try to upset both people and say, well, we do need to write them down, but they're always in pencil. The plans can always change. And we have to be okay with that. But the writing down plans keeps the conflict low because it gives us a chance for communication and alignment. Next, work to create a valuable company, right? I say profit covers a multitude of sins. And so no matter what the exit strategy is, you're setting yourself up for success if you are focused on value add initiatives in the company. Next, establishing a crisis plan. Make sure that something is in place for if something happens to you. That lowers conflict in making sure that if something were to happen, the number of families that go into not a good place if mom or dad dies and the crisis plan is not what the plan was supposed to be. And now we have a lot of messy middle. And then last, just learn to respect the experiences and contributions of each other. I have the privilege of sitting with hundreds of leading generation folks and hundreds of rising generation folks. And I just sometimes want to shake them and say, you're not getting in each other's shoes and seeing the struggles and the challenges of what it means to be in the shadow of the mighty oak as a rising gen person. And you're not really understanding what it means to let go of a company that's been your identity and your heartbeat for 40 years. And so really learning to respect that and sit in each other's seat can help lower that conflict as well. So I rushed through a lot, but again, I wanted a chance for everybody to respond to that, have questions about that. And I definitely would want to hear your stories and your challenges around conflict in the family business. And that just kind of lays the groundwork for our conversation. So any questions for me or, Richard, I'll turn it over to you to facilitate a broader conversation too.
Jared, first of all, thank you. I mean, my God, there's so much in that, right? You went through it quickly, and every single area you could dive deeper, for hours into this thing. So, thank you. Let's open it up here. I can look at there's nothing in the chat room yet. So, anybody want to put something in the chat room, or Jules, you unmuted? Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, we just had a meeting. We have a weekly meeting with the family, and there were some hurt feelings. And I mean, everything that you spoke on, I was like, okay, yep, all of the things. And so I wrote down some notes, and but these are the what you said at the beginning was we're not broken. Every family runs into these things because we are family and we are trying to not step on everybody's toes.
Yeah.
But the thing that runs in my mind of this is business, and at some point in time, you're going to have to understand the requirements that we're asking for are not doing it because we don't trust you. It's this is how we run the business. This is it. And this is what we do moving forward. So get past being mad about it or upset or thinking that you have been attacked. That's not the case. But that's hard, because that's for sure. That's where we're at right now. Is we've got some feelings of, oh well, you don't trust me, and it's because it wouldn't be this if my brother worked for a different company,
Yeah.
but it is because we're in a family, and I'm like So, anyways, just thank you. This resonates 100% with everything you said to where we're at in our transition.
Thanks.
Do you want to add anything to Jules' comment before I go to Martin's next question?
Sure. I mean, I think that, again, yeah, that's common. And the more structure, and I'll use that word, that's kind of a highfalutin word. I'm from Texas, so I use words like highfalutin, but that's kind of like a highfalutin term. Structure, it can be abstract. And so what I try to do is break that down to very practical. And a lot of times structure is process and expectations.
Okay.
And so the more that the expectations are explicit, not just coming from my head, but are written down in a documented process, the easier it is for a family member to trust that it really is about the business and it's not personal, right? So The more we can put on the structure, the less it's like, well, we didn't just make this up for you. This has actually been in place. It's right here. It's written down. That's been true for 10 years, So that's the only thing where structure can help that.
I had that very conversation with my mom, and I'm like, we need to write this down, because what you say versus what my brother says, and there's a disconnect here. But why, giving the why do we do this? Well, we're in Texas as well, but we have heavy machinery. Machinery is expensive. Why do we want to track it? Because it's dang expensive.
Yeah.
So we want to keep track of that. But anyways, the writing it down is great. Art, I'm working on that yesterday. Thank you.
Good.
Thanks, Jules. Great job, Jared. Laurie, go ahead.
Hi. My question is for maybe a piece of advice of someone who works with a family business that's in the middle of the transition of going from first gen to next gen, and I'm not part of the family.
Okay.
How to stay out of Dodge, but answer to everyone that's in charge.
Oh, well, yeah, that's the challenge. But just the way you said that makes it challenging. Everyone that's in charge. So, yeah, I mean, it's a tricky place to be. I used to run a peer group that was only for CEOs and presidents, that non-family CEOs and presidents of family-owned companies, and so they were constantly dragged into family stuff. And I think one thing I would say is modeling for them good communication, and one of that is not engaging in what I call triangulation. So family businesses are terrible at triangulation. I don't even have to know you to know most of you are probably terrible if you're in a family business at triangulation. And that is because it's really hard to go direct with somebody, but we have to blow off the steam. Like, we have that emotion, but we don't want to go direct with it. So we go to someone else. So we offload it to someone else. And then a lot of times non-family, yes, I was going to say the Lauries of the world become the dumping ground for everyone's emotional stress, right? And that's a tough place to be. Not only emotionally, but just very practically. It's like, what am I supposed to do with all of this? But the more you can encourage that to say, and I know it's risky because they're also like your bosses and other things, but the more you can defer that over and say, hey, I think it'd be great for you to talk to so-and-so about that. Like, I don't know if I can really fix it. I think you need to talk to so-and-so, and to keep trying to put pressure on them to go direct with each other can be a really valuable resource to get you out from behind it, but it also is helping them, because every time you engage in triangulation, you're actually enabling them to not deal with their own issues.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm lucky in the sense that all parties value my opinion on stuff, so I tend to become like a sounding board. But at some point, I actually have a job to do too. I cannot just play counselor to you guys. So
Yeah, and if I can, Lori, I've worked with a number of Loris, and I can say a lot of times it ends out in high stress and burnout. So please, be aware of that and take care of yourself.
no, I appreciate it. And just honestly hearing this group of other people having the same thing, even if it's family within family, and that I'm just like caught up in the mix of that, the whole, to what Jules said, just hearing that we're not alone and we're not broken, huge. So
Yeah.
we're all in it together, guys.
Thanks, Laurie. That's one of the main reasons we started this forum, right? So, Martin, you're back on. Is your microphone working?
Well, we were reading your lips, Richard. You couldn't read mine? So I guess my camera wasn't on. So mine's going to be a little tricky because, full disclosure, my daughter's on the call. So I guess I should start off by apologizing to my daughter for something I may or may not have done or may do in the future. So in the spirit of your great wisdom, sorry. The big thing is the generation gap, this balance of life. I didn't have a balance of life when I was starting out in the industry. I mean, we worked all the time, but working with my daughter and married with two of my beautiful grandkids, the balance of life for my daughter is much different than I came up in the industry. And the expectations of my daughter's an employee, my daughter's the daughter, and my daughter is the mother of my grandkids. It gets tricky. And managing that balance, managing that respect, managing the boundaries is probably one of the things I internally struggle with.
Yeah, that's good. Heather, I might call on you in a minute. I'd be curious your perspective on that. But one thing I would say, and I don't know, Martin, if this has been your experience, but a lot of leading generation will talk out of both of their sides of their mouth, and it makes it impossible for the rising gen. So this is what I mean. They will say, well, because you're my daughter, I definitely don't want you to work as hard as I did. Please don't do that. It was not good for me. It wasn't good for my health. It wasn't good for my family. Don't do that. The very next day, they're saying, why are you leaving so early? There's so much work to do. How could, and that just puts the rising gen in an impossible situation. It's which one is this? So Heather, I'd be curious to hear if you've experienced that and kind of how do you feel about that balance?
Yes, that has happened. A big part of this is that I understand that Martin, or my dad, got to where he is today because he worked hard, because he built those relationships. And with me being his only daughter and, stepping in to take over, I also want to maintain those relationships and maintain that. But with that said, there were times, that he did work really hard, and, may have not been able to attend this or that. And so, having two little girls, we have, I'm very active in their life, sports and field days and all these things. And I want to show up, but it's finding the boundary. And also when I decided to come on board full time, we sat down and talked about those expectations. So we did communicate, we did talk about the expectations, and it really, I think you hit a nail on the head, is that he really he wants me to be there for my kids. He wants, but then the next day it's well, we have this networking event, that's an hour away at bath time. Why can't you be there? And so it's, and so we tried to talk about the expectations of the percentage of travel, the percentage of networking events to attend. I do think that, I've only been here a month, full time. I did do part time for 3 years. So I think that it's, ironing some things out. I do think that one of the biggest things, I do travel a lot, for my mental health. I travel a lot. He's not a fan of that. And so I think that I do need to recognize that and understand that the position that I'm in as a vice president of a division, that's not what what they do. And my family, my spouse, and my kids will be like, well, your dad, travels and he does this and he does that. Yeah, well, he's been in the business 40 plus years. He's earned his right there. He's earned his way there. And so it's difficult because I have people behind me, saying things, and so it's a difficult balance. I do believe that attending this webinar and we are ironing some of those things out. It's going to be an ongoing process, but yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for being willing to open up about that. I mean, I think, yeah, it's vulnerable to have father and daughter on the call and kind of being able to speak openly to everybody and hear it. But the only thing I would say, yeah, you're still early on. I think one thing that can help, again, is maybe focusing on what are the outcomes you're looking for, particularly with your performance. So there's not so much, well, I didn't do it that way. Well, there may be another way to do it. We don't know that yet. What if we focused on some clear goals and metrics? And basically that allows you to take the stress off the accountability on day-to-day activity and more focus on, well, if you're hitting the right marks, whatever that is, whatever the goals are that you're accountable for, if you're hitting that, then we can take the pressure on the how you're doing that. But if you're not hitting that, then it makes more sense to put more pressure on you. Like, yeah, maybe it's the travel needs to cut down, maybe it's these things. But if we can focus on that, because Martin's going to naturally have anxiety about whether this is going to work or not. And so there's going to be energy toward it. I'd rather the energy be toward that end result of like, are you managing a P&L? Are there some profit metrics? Are there some relational metrics? What are some metrics we can put in place so we're monitoring those? And if you're hitting those marks, we can kind of be like, okay, I don't love that you're doing that, but it looks like you're hitting all the right marks. Okay, I'm willing to trust it, right? So we can trust the data of those metrics, and the two of you can agree on what those metrics are. That can take some of the pressure off. So just a suggestion or an idea. Yeah.
Well, that's great advice, but the only thing is there's always optics, right? I've got a large organization. We have 3 divisions, and the optics of all the other people as well, being the owner's child, is going to be, there's going to be a lot of eyes and a lot of criticism and a lot of, well, why do they get to do it? So the optics is what I really focus on is, well, why does she get to travel so much? Why does she get to work remote? Why isn't,
that's really good. That's good. Yeah, that's trickier. I think that's maybe a field of this conversation today, but I appreciate that because that definitely adds a layer of nuance. Yeah, for sure.
Lorraine?
I have a question. This is Lorraine.
Yeah.
I am in a unique position because I'm the executive director of our Southwest Florida chapter, but I also work for a subcontractor. The subcontractor happens to be my family's company. My parents started it 35 years ago. And so for about 10 years, I've worked for them in varying capacities. But actually, the reason I love my job at ASA is because it's not a part of my family's company. And I'm very autonomous with that. And I got it on my own merit. And so I think that's clearly something that, I struggle with, as this is the first one I've had an opportunity to get on this call, the forum. And one, I would say phenomenal. I wasn't able to hop on right at one, but excellent information. Honestly, I felt like this was a group therapy session. And I was like, this is something that we should have had 10 years ago when my family and I, joined kind of forces together. So I don't necessarily have a question. I was double checking to make sure none of my family was on the call, but basically when you were talking about communication, that's kind of non-existent, and triangulation is 100% what always happens in our situation. So it's certainly difficult. So my brother, also have an older brother, and he is the vice president. He's worked there about probably 10 years more than I have. And so he's probably around 20-ish years of being there, and me around 10. And so he obviously has seniority simply because of the longevity of him being there. Also, his position is vice president. But it's difficult because we're in a very weird spot right now. My parents are considering, they're actually in the midst of selling, and I just found that out actually last month, which I guess has been in the works for about a year. And so there's a lot of information that happens. I think I don't necessarily know kind of like my place in it and how to communicate. And since we don't ever communicate about it, I don't necessarily know like how to bring that up or how to even start the conversation. I will ask kind of some leading questions or, probing questions, but yeah, I'm really actually excited if they end up selling it, because then it could just be a company that I work for, and for obviously other reasons of them getting out of it, and hard work paid off. But yeah, and then the other thing is, like, it's not that they kind of like pin my brother and I against one another, but it's definitely an interesting dynamic with that. So here's my question: when there is maybe an unhealthy family dynamic, what do you suggest to get the ball rolling towards a healthy dynamic?
Yeah. So in kind of in family systems therapy or family systems thinking, the main thing is to accept that you can't control anyone else, like you can't change anyone else. But
Right.
once you can do that and you can take responsibility for yourself, a lot of times that does change the system, because the system is sort of not to get nerdy about this, but the system's at an equilibrium. Everyone's playing their part to kind of keep things steady, maybe not
Right.
healthy, but steady. It's like, well, I know if I do this, that's going to disrupt things, or I'm going to be the troublemaker. So I'm going to not do those things.
Yeah.
So the more you can sort of figure out how you can opt out, like what are the ways that you're contributing to the unhealth or the toxicity or the poor dynamic, and then opt out of those things, that's going to change everything. In some ways, just to be disclaimer, sometimes you get blamed for it, and it's like you turn out to be the bad guy. So I had a family once where I interviewed everybody, because that's what I do at the beginning, kind of getting to know everybody, and they just kept saying our sister is like such a words I'm not going to say on this, but like she just is such a troublemaker. Everyone was trouble. And then I talked to her, and in my estimation, she was like the healthiest one of the bunch, and everyone was just pissed off because she was unwilling to like engage the bad behavior. It was like, no, I'm not going to like talk bad about all my other siblings behind their back. Like I'm not going to engage in the, and everyone was like, oh, she's just too good for us. So all I had to say, sometimes opting out doesn't make you look good, but it certainly changes the system, and hopefully people start to see the system for what it is. It's like, oh yeah, I get it. We're not communicating well. So my suggestion usually is to like work on yourself and get to be the healthiest, most mature, developed person you can be. And when you do that, it can really change a system for the good.
Awesome.
Jared, I have a couple of comments, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
I'm second generation and going into the third generation. But during the first generation and the second generation, a lot of the family members wanted to pit people against each other. And I simply said, I am neutral in the matter. If you have a problem, you need to work it out with the other person. We actually ended up in court, and it really paid off to be at a neutral position. But it got to a certain point where I had to appear in court, and I looked at all the facts and I said, no, this person is wrong. And that's how we dealt with it. So sometimes if you're in that position, you need to be neutral.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, it's like you're not going to play in it
together if you can, but it's been difficult. Sometimes you can't. One of the things, first to second generation, actually, we realized that some people could not be in the business, and we simply had to buy them out. That was really the only option, and it's kind of painful, but sometimes that's the only option.
So one thing I'll mention, because maybe it's a helpful analogy, is families who work together have to be more mature than other normal families. So for me, I don't have to be as good at handling family relationships, because my family lives in Texas and I see them like 3 or 4 times a year. So we go, and by the end of the week, the tensions are already climbing up. And then what happens is we just go back to our homes and it's been good. Nothing blew up. So that's like, I call that like a pickup truck worth of baggage. I only need an engine that can carry a pickup truck's worth of baggage because I only see my family 3 or 4 times a year. Imagine if you have to work with your family every single day. Like I say, you need a semi truck's worth of hauling power because you got a lot of baggage. It's just every day you're having to navigate those dynamics. Every day you're having to like readjust expectations. And so I'm a big proponent of just personal development and growth, and so that you can be clear-headed. And like you said, Jack, like whenever people were wanting to get you in the drama, to be able to opt out, not in a I'm going to take my ball and go home immature way, but just in a neutral, I see all the angles. I see everybody's perspective. I could see it from your perspective and your perspective. And I really want us just to be a healthy family, and we have to communicate. So I'm going to advocate communication, not necessarily pick a side. But that takes a lot of work to get to that place.
Hey, Jared, my family's in England, and that isn't far enough. Let me tell you. No, I'm kidding. Hey, Jack. Great comments, Jack. Great comments there too. Anybody else want to jump in here? I don't see anything in the chat room. Jason, you got anything you want to cover? Jerry, I haven't heard from you today. Not that we have to, or James, but any questions?
Not really a question. I was in terms of family dynamics, you mentioned talking a little bit about equalization, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how hard is that for you? You got some family members that are part of the business, they want to be part of the business, and you got other family members that don't want to be part of the business, but you know they're going to ask for their share when the time comes that the business owner passes. So we had some conversations around that about getting that business succession planning, getting a state lawyer, and being a business owner, it's hard to blend business versus personal. So my owner, she's treating her business as her baby, which is rightfully so, and the emotions come out when we talk about succession planning and what do you want to do with it. So we're just having a little bit of difficulty kind of going through those conversations, like I'm sure most of you are, because it is a personal matter. They built it from scratch, did a lot with there. But do you have any ways to kind of have them self-discover the need for themselves through maybe a checklist or common pitfalls for business owners, so they could see for themselves that, it's not you telling me, it's actually I'm seeing it for myself, that I do have some gaps in my planning that I need to take care of?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it would be wonderful if there was just like a here's how you get someone to. Again, I kind of think of it as like some people I just want to kind of shake them and be like, do you not see, like, ignoring the problem isn't making the problem go away. It's actually going to make it worse. But yeah, there are certainly, there are certainly checklists, or, hey, I think a big thing, James, I would say, is helping business owners understand that succession planning is part of doing business, right? Like, they don't want to realize that exiting your business is part of business. Like, whatever that is, how do you do it in a way that furthers the legacy? Like, do you want to be, how do you want to be seen? How do you want this company to be seen? And the problem is, like you said, it's personal, because exit planning is often tied to, and I'll use the word that we don't like to use, it's also tied to like people's death or mortality. It's like, I don't want to think about that part of my life. And so I'm not going to. And that the business succession gets wrapped up into end of life and estate and putting your will together. And that's causing them to think about stuff they don't want to think about. But if there's a way to bring it into their consciousness about being a good business leader is also about planning for the future. And that's not a strategic plan just, but it's also this long-term plan. So I'm on the board of a fairly large company where they do strategic planning every year, and it's pretty robust, but they never included what's the end game. And so as the board, now we're asking the question, but what's the owners going to do? What are the owners going to do? Because that actually impacts our year-to-year strategic planning. If we need to buy out one of the owners, because it's a husband-wife team, and one of them is 30%, and in the next 5 years, she wants to step down, and we need to have the capital to buy out 30%, that's an operational thing we need to know, because we need to build up our reserves. We need to have some cash and things like that. So I think the more you can try to help owners see, and business leaders who are owners, kind of owner operator, see that business planning includes the long-term strategy and planning as well, that may help reduce the anxiety or take it out of that personal bucket and put it more in the business bucket.
Well done, great. James, just a quick question on that. Are you, you mentioned the owner, right? Are you in the family? So are you part of the family of the ownership, or?
Oh, I just happen to be a trusted person, trusted friend of them while working on that.
So I think, Jared, not stealing anything from what you're saying there, because I 200% agree. Sort of it's the same answer, right? But it's harder for him maybe as an employee having that conversation than if he was a family member, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's always that risk of, yeah, Lori's nodding over there. Yeah, there's always a risk, right? It's like, because it can be so sensitive and touchy, it's hard to bring these things up whenever they sign your paycheck.
Aaron, I have a suggestion. There was a company in Michigan recently, and of course, you got a lot of big egos in this company. So what they did is they hired a third party to interview all of the members, to do personality tests to determine what strengths they had. And that really helped them because it was a third party. Because if they just got together themselves, they would just fight. So that is an option for some people. Then there are companies out there that will do that, and they were very good at doing it. And they finally selected a person based upon this company's all the personality tests and everything, and it really worked out well. So that is an option for people.
Yes, I mean that is my job, is often to be that third person, and I joke that half my job is just to be a warm body, just because just having a third party in there can really change the dynamic. So yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. It's really hard to navigate it sometimes from the inside. So having an outside party to navigate that can be really helpful.
Brilliant.
We
Jules?
we use predictive index
Mhm.
for those types of things to help us understand what our strong suits are. And you can look at the difference between family members and how to work with each other. And then when we hire new roles that are not family, understanding building the role that says, okay, this is the person we need, and then saying, great, what does that role look like, and have them take the test as we bring them in. That's been really helpful for us. I have two Mavericks that like to work with each other, and so that's been quite interesting. But we're making our way. But predictive index is good, but we also like the ability to have a third party conversation.
Mm-hmm.
The test is great. You can refer back to that, but having a sounding board sometimes helps just clear the air. So yeah, both of those are great options, and I would say use both the test, but also a third party to walk you through those.
Yeah, you've got McQuaig and Disc are some of the other personality stuff that they have too, I believe. So, Jared, talking about third parties, I mean, running a small business is costly and anyway, right? So, but when you're dealing with this stuff, and this is only our second forum call that we've had, right? So, but and everybody's at different stages maybe here, but I think it's super important to budget for third party consulting, depending on what it is. You're going to have to pay somebody probably for an evaluation, right? You're going to have legal. You're going to have, so you've got to be prepared for that, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the doing it, I would say this. I mean, this is a little biased because this is what I do. But if I take myself out of it and just think of all the companies I've worked with, I can't think of any that would say, man, I wish we would have done more of that on our own. But I've had plenty that said, man, I wish we wouldn't have tried to do this on our own. We kind of made it messier than it needed to be. There are people within different verticals who this is what they do, and so they can help navigate that. And finding someone that you really trust. The only thing I would say is be careful with your advisors because sometimes their purview or their perspective is limited. So having an accountant lead a transition process, you're going to get skewed in a very tax efficient way, which isn't always a bad thing for taxes, but that can actually hurt the family if it's like pushing for a particular solution that doesn't take into account the bigger picture of the family. And the same with like an attorney. They're going to be very risk averse, and that's going to be the lens through which they are, that they're kind of viewing everything. So they're, when you look at an estate plan, they're going to really probably almost always push a trust because it's the safest solution, but they don't necessarily talk to the family about, but that has some ownership issues down the line. It has some communication issues, has some control issues, which can all be managed, but they don't necessarily always give them those options up front. So I tend to sit as the coordinator of all those teams, but regardless, having like a coordinated advisors meeting every year or every couple of years can be really helpful. So you get the accountant and the attorney and the financial planner in the room together with a couple of the key folks, owners or whatever, and have them talk together. Because it doesn't make sense for the owner to translate to the accountant what the attorney said and like that, get them in the room together. It's also often a little cheaper because they're all in the room together at the same time. And you sit them down and say, here's the goal. We want a successful transition or we want a successful this, and then have them fight each other on it. And I think can be a helpful solution.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Any other comments or questions? I shared, Jared, your information in the chat area here with everybody. And we'll, as I said, we're going to record this and we'll follow up with folks that weren't on the call here. But anybody got any other questions, comments, want to share anything before we clock off here? Okay. The next call, I would love feedback. You've all got my email on maybe what the next topic could be. Quite frankly, I think there's a lot of topics that, Jared, you shared in your initial presentation. We could take one line of each slide for crying out loud and spend at least an hour on that. So thinking maybe we dissect that a little bit, but love feedback from the group here about what you would like to see on the next topic based on some travel and holidays and things like that. I was looking at Thursday, December 4th at say maybe 3 p.m. Eastern. I know it's a little bit past November, but November would be getting into Thanksgiving or whatever. So does that sound good for everybody to sound open? 3 o'clock Eastern gives us time for East Coast, West Coast. I'll send that out and we'll do broader advertising. Jared, I think you gave us your blessing with the recording here and the slides to be able to share them as a follow-up. We normally put it on YouTube too. So good for you, good for us kind of thing. So
yeah, that's great.
Great. And I'd love to talk to you more about other connecting again about some other stuff here too. So with that, we will adjourn. But Jared, first of all, thank you. I learned a hell of a lot from this. I think your approach, the presentation you did, the layout, this is not easy, but the way you've sort of presented it makes it a hell of a lot easier. So thank you very, very much. We appreciate you doing it.
Hey, Richard. Sorry, before we go, one thing that I would find interesting maybe in future calls on this is it's kind of like the family transition going from generation to generation. There's a bunch of different ways to do it, but maybe have some examples of how companies have done it and done it successfully. Because I know there's a bunch of different ways to do it. I've got friends that have done it. We're kind of in the process, but we're like, well, which of these 15 different ways do we go? Maybe just some success stories, a little 5-minute blurb or something would be useful, I think.
When you're talking about transition, and Jared, feel free to jump in here. Are you looking at, that could look at different ways of selling ESOPs or whatever, and or
Yeah,
all
yes.
of the
So
above?
like me buying out my parents' shares.
Okay.
How do you do that? So we've talked to our accountants, lawyers. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. Our accountants say, don't just buy it outright. You're going to have this huge debt over your company, and it's going to affect all your bonding capacities and all this other stuff. And then there's, they can gift portions of it. But then
you're thinking of like actual structure, like how to structure the buyouts. Yeah.
Yes.
And there's so many different ways to do that, Jason, too, right? So, and you're going to have some people to swear by, oh, ESOP was great for us, where others are going to say private equity, which is very, very rare, by the way, that anybody loves private equity. But interesting. I'll take a look at that. And Jared, I may even pick your brains on how we.
Yeah, because I think, Jason, I hear what you're saying, kind of what's the right mix of gifting versus purchasing. Oftentimes there's like a retained earnings gift amount that goes, and it's a loan back to the company. So we take it out and then we put it back in, and now it's owed to the parents over time. So you still have cash flow. Like, yeah, there's like 3 or 4 common ways to structure that takes care of the rising gen, the leading gen, and the company in terms of cash flow and financial performance. So absolutely, there's some options.
Brilliant.
That would be really great info to just give somebody, just to be like, hey, you guys want to think about it, here's a couple of different directions, and they can get that. It was a great way to start that conversation for us, like non-family members, to be like, hey, it would be really helpful for something like that.
So, Jason, what are you doing on December 4th at 3 p.m. Eastern?
I know. I was like, I plan on being there. I thought this was just a one-time forum thing, but if it's a continuing, I plan on being on all of them. So
Brilliant.
I guess I missed the first one.
Yeah, no. This is going to continue. Jared, are you around on December 4th too?
I'm not sure. I'll have to look. Just follow up and let me, give me the date, and we'll see.
No. I'm putting you on the spot. No, I'm kidding. I'll follow up with you, but there may be other folks that we can bring into that conversation too. That I know a lot of people that have exited, right, in different ways, so we can bring them in as an example too. Jules, did you want to say something?
Yes, absolutely. I'm ready for December 4th. And my mom, I told her about this one. She goes, is it too late to join? I said, you have to register. So I want to get her registered for this next one as well, because it's her business and she's passing it down to me and my brother. So this is incredibly important information for us.
Brilliant. We want to grow this again. The first call that I set up, right, was to get it started. I think here we've got even more meat on the bones here, especially bringing Jared in. So we'll just get better and better. Not that I'm sure we can get better than Jared, right? We've hit the jackpot here, but thank you all very, very much. I'll do the follow up. We'll get a calendar invite out for December 4th, and I'll work on some of that, looking at some of those transition options to put into play there. Okay.
Thanks everybody for letting me jump on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.